Welcome back to another episode of Fort Riley the Podcast. I'm Caitlin Nauer with Fort Riley Public Affairs. If you've ever been to Fort Riley, you've likely noticed the two-story limestone building just across from Irwin Army Community Hospital. While this building isn't as richly decorated as some of the other historic structures on Fort Riley, it has a unique story as the first Territorial Capital State Historic Site. Kansas was not yet a state in July 1855 when the first governor of the Kansas Territory, Andrew Reeder, met with the territorial legislature in this building. They wanted to meet at a location farther away from the shared border of pro-slavery Missouri, so they found this building in a town called Pawnee. Catherine Hensler, historian at the Kansas Historical Society and site director of the first Territorial Capital State Historic Site, comments.
The only thing I can find is that it was used as a warehouse. It was unfinished when Reeder decided that this was going to be the capital, and they rushed to complete it by this legislative session. So it very quickly turned over to State House for 5 days, and then it went back to storage. I've heard there were other meetings in there. It was just kind of used as a community building until the military reclaimed it, and then it went back to storage.
Over the next 5 days, Governor Reeder and the legislature deliberated over the creation of a Kansas Constitution and if Kansas should be a free or slave state.
Everybody who was either, whether they were siding with the Union or the Confederacy, they were waiting for an event like this to happen. They were waiting to find out what decision would come of this new territory. And for either side, there was always going to be one side that didn't agree. And they were going to use that as kind of the match that's going to spark the fire.
Ultimately, however, the group decided to head back to Shawnee Mission to proceed with debates. So, what happened to the building?
The building was only used for 5 days and eventually let to fall into disrepair. Some of the pictures from around the 1900s are just, it looks like a completely different building. And then in the 1920s, the railroad came in and it was sitting on their right of way, and they decided they were going to fund the restoration of it. What you see right now is a product of that 1928-29 restoration. So it was at that time that the railroad gifted to the Kansas Historical Society with the understanding that this organization will oversee it and ensure its preservation.
Thanks to the thriving community partnership between Fort Riley and the Kansas Historical Society, the building is now a museum dedicated to the history of Pawnee, Fort Riley, and those 5 days the territorial legislature spent there.
A Kansas Historical Society property on federal land. It's really just managed through partnership. We work with them. They've been great partners.
You can visit the museum on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Sundays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Admission is free, but donations are accepted.
Any donation that comes in, it does go through the State Historical Foundation, but it gets earmarked for our facility specifically. And it could be for maintenance, it could be for supplies, it could be for some future programming.
To learn more about the first Territorial Capital State Historic Site or the Kansas Historical Society, visit kshs.org. Thank you for listening to another episode of Fort Riley the Podcast.